everybody, how's it going? I'm Nicole Erny. I'm here to talk about assessing beer with you guys today. Um, if you don't have a beverage, you will probably want to grab a beer or something else. If you'd like to do some fun stuff with us as we go along, we can do 2 beers. I have 2 similar beers to do some comparing. There isn't a big program about that though, so just if you feel like doing some more serious assessing. Let's see. I posted a link to the slides, like a printout of the slides in the chat. I'm going to add it again, just in case you can't see if you just joined. And that way we can kind of do a combination of having my slides up on the screen and not having my slides up on the screen, just so we can have some variety. Cool. I want to make sure. Okay, if you guys have questions as we go along, please feel free to throw those in. I will try to keep an eye on it. I don't have a monitor or a moderator today because we were just having some audio trouble. So I'll do my best to answer questions either as we go or towards the end. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to make sure. I'm a little nervous about that. Hope so. Yeah. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, let's get started. I actually wanted to start first by just saying that I've realized as a process of getting ready for this presentation that it has been a serious year on top of everything that we already all went through with COVID. So I just wanted to be really real with you guys for a second and just let you know that like I had a hard time getting ready to speak to you guys today. Just with everything that's been going on, like I've internalized so much of it, and I think that other people have really spoken really well to kind of issues that women are facing in our industry right now, and how things have just come to this kind of culmination. And it can be hard on us too, just absorbing it and trying to live our lives. And I just wanted to let you guys know that it's not magically easier for me or anybody else. Yeah, so if you're struggling, you definitely aren't alone. I was full of a lot of anxiety in the whole process of getting ready for this. So grateful to see all of you guys in the chat here. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. And thank you to everybody, Women in Beer Summit, for dragging me out to talk to you guys today. We are going to be talking about my favorite thing. I am going to go ahead and share my screen here for a little bit. There we go. We're going to go into presentation mode though. Wow, it's been a long time since I did this, you guys. There it is. Yeah, okay, cool. So, oh, you know what though? If I do that, I can't. Uh-oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on. So I'm gonna go here, but then I'm gonna go. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna stop sharing for just 1 second. Share. Sorry, I should have figured this out before. Oh, I'm going to share. Well, I mean, you guys have the link to the slides, yeah? I think maybe we should just do it that way, because I don't know. Nobody really wants to look at boring text-based slides. So there's the link again, since it probably got buried. Oh, it won't let me send a duplicate message. Isn't that cute? Here. There you go. So you can click that and follow along. And there we go. Okay, so today we're going to talk about assessing beer, how to do it, what the basic physiology is, so that you can use that to your advantage when you are assessing beer. And so, kind of our need to know basics there. Kind of the process of how to sample beer. A little bit about this like concept of like tasting being subjective versus objective tasting. And then we'll talk a little bit about describing beer, developing your palate. And that section kind of a little bit will kind of give you some tips if you are preparing for BJCP or Cicerone exams, or if you just, want to be a better beer judge, or just, you like to have fun describing beer flavor when you're enjoying it. So why assess beer? First of all, of course, we enjoy beer. I think I'm going to start assessing some beer right now, actually. So assessing beer is really important for just, getting more out of this industry that we're in, or aspiring to be in, or this hobby that we have, because I know there are lots of home brewers here. So enjoying our beer more, then looking at the quality of the beer. So are there off flavors present? Is the brand true to target? Does it taste like what we want? So quality is another place where assessing beer flavor is essential. Now, we have lots of ways to assess whether a beer has an off flavor in it. There's lots of analytical tests that we can do. There's lots of things that can be done in the lab, but they are not as fast or as efficient as a well-trained human palate. So we can detect diacetyl much more quickly than we'd ever be able to get lab results back showing if it's above average threshold or not. So really essential there. The flavor profile. So if we want to dive deep into a flavor profile for whatever reason, so one main reason might just be enjoying it or making a hedonic decision. So right now I have kind of two jobs. My post-COVID world. I work in the lab at Faction Brewing Company, and then I also have like a side hustle buying beer for a local restaurant group, which is super fun because I get to see what everybody's doing every week and taste lots of beer. But when I do flavor profile assessment of beer for buying, I'm maybe looking for quality, but then I'm also making a hedonic decision about do I like this? Will my customers like this? Is this something that's going to sell well? And then also for development purposes, right? So how is an ingredient expressing in a finished beer flavor? Or maybe you want to get to know that ingredient better. Or maybe you're trying to decide how you want to use that ingredient moving forward, or if you want to know what the profile of a hop is as it comes through your beer, so that you can have a backup plan for substitutions or know what you're looking for at hop selection. So another important aspect. And then assessing beer flavor is also part of testing our own palate. So if you're taking the BJCP exam or the Cicerone exams, or any other assessment where assessing flavor is going to be part of it, you're going to want to have the skill. And then, of course, any other sensory panels. So let's talk a little bit about what we have going on. So when we talk about tasting physiology, so if you're following along on the printed or the PDF, we're starting on that tasting physiology basics, which I misspelled. Cool. So how do we taste? Taste is a misnomer. So we usually use the word taste to refer to our overall perception of flavor. Taste, when we talk about taste, we're really talking about just the tongue taste. So like just those basic flavors that we can taste on our tongues. But flavor is more the overall. We'll explain this a little bit here. So gustation is actual taste, and it's limited to a few basic tastes. So we have sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. Those are the readily agreed upon group of tastes. We have in our taste buds, we have receptors for each of those. So that old tongue map that there's a picture of in the slides, like that we all saw in our grade school textbooks, hellaciously wrong. There's not much truth to it. There are zones of flavor receptors on our tongues that, okay, maybe a little bit more here, a little bit more there, but it's not that flavor tongue map. I think most of us probably that are curious about this stuff probably went home from school that day and like stuck your finger in the sugar jar and like put sugar on the back of your tongue to see if it tasted sweet, and it did. And you found out that your teacher lied to you that day. Yeah, so that's pretty wrong. But what we do have is in our taste buds, which are not the things on our tongue. They're kind of buried in the papillae of our tongue. Those taste buds have different receptors that are going to be activated by different compounds, but we get these kind of 5 main sensations that we register in our brains from tasting them. You'll see on the slides that I put fat on there and crossed it out because for a while there were a lot of researchers there was a group of researchers that really felt that fat was a taste. It's kind of out again. So that one's been kind of back and forth. And you'll see that I also put one called kokumi. Kokumi is an interesting effect. In the US, we know it as flavor blasted Doritos. Like basically anything that has that extra oomph of flavor, they're taking advantage of something that happens with certain calcium ions that are a flavor enhancer. So this intense flavor enhancement is, especially of salty and umami flavors, is considered by some to be another taste, but by others to be kind of just a flavor enhancement. So it's kind of a different thing. Not really that useful in beer, except maybe beer and food pairing. Okay. All right. So we do have a better model now, like I was talking about, of how we taste, but it's pretty simple. So we have those receptors. Here comes sucrose. It takes a lot of sucrose to register that it's there, because we like to have a lot of sugar intake in our diets. I mean, I speak for myself, but we, as mammals, we gravitate towards those sugars. So we get that stimulation of that receptor, and then that sends a signal to our brain. On that little slide, there's some of the mapped out neural pathways that are known. This is still a fairly emerging science of really truly understanding this stuff. And if you're interested in learning more, Yale is a big research center for gustation and olfaction. But yeah, so that's it for taste, though. Taste is kind of simple to understand when you think about it. It's kind of like thinking about your sense of touch, right? Like you kind of get it. You're like, okay, I slapped myself. Like, oh, I have pain receptors. I have temperature receptors that realize that this hand is colder than my arm. Send signal to my brain. Okay, you hit yourself, stop hitting yourself, etc. But we have, when we go to sense of smell, it gets a little bit more complicated. So olfaction, or sense of smell, is really where the magic happens when we're really thinking about the full flavor profile of something. And it's a bit more complex to kind of like wrap our heads around how our sense of smell works. So we have over 1,000 different types of receptors in our nasal cavities, and they respond to different aroma compounds in different ways. So here comes along an aroma compound, and it hits a receptor, and that gets activated by it, but it also hits this receptor, that receptor, and this receptor. They all get kind of a little bit stimulated by that, but at varying degrees. And the complete signal of the levels of stimulation each of those receptors is experiencing gets kind of translated into a smell image. So we kind of have this snapshot of that aroma, of that smell. And that's kind of how our brain processes it. It's like almost like our visual memory. So once we have that snapshot, then you reinforce it by smelling that same thing over and over again. And then, not only is it this Polaroid photo, but it's in the top of the box of photos, right? Because it's something that we're used to identifying. Once you remember a smell, it doesn't go away. You remember a smell forever. That does not mean you can remember what it is called or where it comes from or any of that stuff. But your brain, the deep part of your brain, the very old part of our brains, remembers smells and will have associations with that smell that are subconscious, that we may not be aware of. So smell is very, very powerful that way. There's a few reasons for that. We're going to talk about here in a second. I don't want to skip ahead. No, we can talk about that now. So basically, when we smell, we're going to be taking sniffs of something, getting those aromas into our nasal cavity, activating the receptors that are sensitive to those aromas, getting those smell images kind of rocking in our brains, and then kind of identifying what's going on there. So when we smell, we can do it kind of two ways. So there's orthonasal, so through the front of the nose, so you're sniffing something. But a really important aspect of flavor assessment is retronasal sense of smell. So after you swallow something or while something is in your mouth, most of the flavor components that you're getting are going to be those aromas that are coming through retronasally. So we have when you're really sick, barring COVID, because COVID actually did affect people's actual sense of taste, not just their smell. But let's say you're stuffed up with allergies, and you're like, oh, I can't taste anything, right? That might not be true, actually. I remember having a cold once and just putting down a whole bag of sour gummy worms because they were sweet and sour and had a texture. And that was enough flavor for me. I couldn't smell them. I had no idea what flavor they were. Every once in a while, I got kind of a fruity smell. But what's happening when you're stuffed up and you're sick, you're not getting your retronasal sense of smell, which is why food becomes really boring when you're stuffy and sick. But you are getting those tongue tastes. So maybe chicken soup still tastes pretty amazing because one of the main flavors that you're getting in that soup from that chicken stock is going to be umami and then salt. So that still tastes good. That is the number one reason why people confuse taste and smell. And then we also conflate them, especially when we taste things that smell sweet, right? Our brains get trained over and over again. We're going to talk about this again later, to associate things. So when I eat this pink candy, it smells like grapefruit and it's sweet. Pink grapefruit candy, sweet. Pink grapefruit candy, sweet. And then at some point, I can drink a grapefruit La Croix, which is not sweet, but it's telling my brain that it's sweet, and I'm getting the pleasure as though it were sweet because my brain has been so trained to associate that aroma with sweetness. When you try to give one of those La Croix to a kid, they usually are like, this is gross, because they're not fooled by that. They don't get the little bump of dopamine as if they're drinking something sweet. They are getting a more raw experience of, there's all this flavor, it smells like grapefruit candy, but it tastes kind of salty and weird. And they often don't like those kind of flavored mineral waters and things. So going back to what I was talking about earlier about kind of the smell image and like how long the staying power of smells is, or when we're smelling something, those receptors I got kind of off track early. The receptors are, in our nasal cavity, and then they go right to our olfactory bulb, which is just kind of behind the arch of your nose. And that olfactory bulb is just basically one membrane away from your nasal cavity. It's the proximity. There's like nowhere for that for the neural pulse to kind of flow. It's not like going from your fingertip to your brain. It's like right there. Processing is almost instant. So we have a really quick reaction to smells because of that. I'm sure you've all experienced something like that at some point in your life. Like, for example, if you smell smoke, like, wait, where is that coming from? Am I burning my house down because I forgot something in the toaster, right? But it's also that your olfactory bulb is also very close and well integrated with the part of your brain that's processing memory and emotion. So that's the other reason why aroma is so impactful to us, is because we remember them forever, and they're tied to our emotion and memory. So we've all had that experience of walking into a room or walking into a place or smelling somebody passing by that reminds us of a person or a place or a time in our lives. It can be disruptive. I'm sure a lot of you guys have had those experiences before where you just kind of get completely thrown off by an aroma that kind of hits you in the face. Or, maybe you feel great because you smell your favorite thing that reminds you of the best day of your childhood or whatever. So it's really, really powerful. Okay. And so that's what I mean by the staying power of those aromas. They kind of stay with you, but maybe not necessarily at a level that's convenient for us in terms of like remembering things to write down on our sensory lists. That's still going to take some work because flavor perception does happen in your brain. I have a slide about mouthfeel in there. I do want to mention something really quick about that, which is that that is another aspect of assessment that's very important, often gets skipped and forgotten about. We also use all of our senses when we're assessing flavor of something. Even our sense of hearing. Sound to me is really critical in the enjoyment of certain foods like potato chips. So it can be important. Our sense of sight is also really important to our assessment of flavor, mostly because of that same thing that I was telling you guys about like the grapefruit liqueur, right? When we see a dark beer, we think roasty. We skip it. Modern humans are so dependent on our sense of sight that we trust it over all of our other senses, those of us that are sighted. And we tend to let our sense of sight override all of other senses. So I could dye a beer black and give it to you, and you would report that it tasted roasty. I would report that it tasted roasty if you did it to me, because if you see the beer, you're tasting it before you can even ask whether it's there or not. So that's really tricky. That's why sometimes it's good to assess beer if you work at a brewery in a room that has a red light or in an opaque cup to kind of cut off our sense of sight, which might override how we perceive flavor. That's also can be true about the turbidity or the haze level of a beer. Some people are looking for that, and some people are rejecting that, and that sometimes gets in the way of assessing the actual flavor. So another more subtle example, I guess. So as we've kind of been discussing as we went along, flavor perception does happen in your brain. So all these signals that we have do get sent to our brains, and our brains are going to be the most important place to think about when we're thinking about how we're performing in terms of flavor. We're going to talk more about that later, but like I kind of told you guys in a couple of small asides already, our brains are very efficient, right? This part of why bias develops in our brains, period, is because we jump to conclusions very quickly, and we merge ideas together very quickly. And even the smallest tidbits reinforce those biases. Some of those are good things, like fire is hot, don't touch it, right? Like that's an example of something that we don't even have to think about, but a 2-year-old does. Like 2-year-olds looking at the fire, like that looks really cool, I really want to touch it. It seems like maybe it might not be a good idea because it does seem hot, right? We don't have to think about that. We see fire and you can almost feel the heat before your hand gets too close to it, right? So we our brains are extremely efficient at doing this. It's part of just how they work. It's just part of evolution. But it can sometimes not be great. For example, with just bias in general, and when we talk about bias in a negative way, right? Like everything. Like I don't want to get into it, but when we're thinking about tasting, it's also a problem there too, because our brains are so efficient. Lazy, if you want to be mean about it, but it's really about efficiency. That we start to conflate things, and that can get us in trouble and can stop us from being able to really assess something wholly. So it does take work to kind of constantly parse things out, try to figure out what flavor is coming from where, and you kind of go through dips and turns of getting kind of like hyper focused on this flavor that I keep tasting and everything, and maybe it tastes really strong to you everywhere for a little while because it's new or it's something that's just sticking out to you, and then maybe eventually you can taste how it just tastes in context better. So yeah, lots of things to think about there. But let's get into a little bit of tasting technique. So we'll want to grab a beer if you don't already have one. I'm drinking a beer from a newish brewery in the Bay Area, Wondrous. I have the filtered and the unfiltered version of the same Helles, so excited about that. All right, so when we taste beer, and specifically when we're tasting beer for any kind of assessment, we're going to want to approach the way we taste the beer in the same way each time. So this is part of moving towards tasting more objectively. Why is it so important? Why can't I just drink the beer, right? Why can't I just do it the way I want to? You can do it the way you want to. You can take your own approach. The approach that I am going to be describing you today is widely accepted as the standard way of assessing beer flavor. But the main thing is that you take the same approach each time that you assess beer. So part of the scientific method is removing variables, right? You can't, and we're all very different people. We all have our strengths and weaknesses when it comes to assessing flavor. And we all have good days and bad days, right? So when we go to assess beer, one way we can kind of reduce those variables is by at least taking the same approach to tasting each time, because the way you taste is a variable. So if you make that uniform, you're taking that variable away. So then, yeah, like if you're in a horrible mood or if you're elated because you're leaving for vacation tomorrow, those things are still going to affect how the beer tastes, but your at least your process is not changing. So the other thing is you kind of want to have your process be something that eventually gets out of the way. So you're having a process that, yes, when you're first instating that process, you're thinking about it a lot. Like, okay, I have to do this and then this and then this, and I have to remember to exhale like right when I swallow and all of these little things. But once you have habitualized that, it becomes second nature. And then you're not using that brain power to think about your process. You are just doing it because it's what you do. It's how you do it every time. You're not thinking about that anymore. You're releasing more of your like RAM, for lack of a better metaphor, to to actually assessing the beer flavor instead of thinking about how you're tasting or, what hand you're going to use or whatever it is. So yeah, it's all about reducing the bias, signaling to your brain, like, okay, we're not just like hanging out drinking beer, we're like assessing beer now. And then also making sure that you're leaving space and taking time to actually process like the signals that are happening, like all the neurons that are firing, kind of making sense of that so that you can get that on paper. So when we taste beer, you're going to take it in your dominant hand. I always thought, why would you do your dominant hand? Because then you can't write while you taste, which I do sometimes do in certain judging situations, but I always start with a beer in my dominant hand so that I can't do anything else. So like this is what I'm doing. I am assessing this beer. You want to start always with kind of a far away sniff. So out here, pretty far away. That's for a couple different reasons. One reason is, like, I call it the safety sniff. If there's something really overwhelming, this can be really important on certain flights and homebrew competitions, right? Like, you want to know if they like are way overdid it with that spice, right? Before you get your nose in it. So you can smell it from over here. There's also certain aroma compounds that are much stronger from far away on your initial sniff than they will be later. So a lot of sulfur-containing compounds. And aromas like light struck, aromas like DMS will sometimes be much stronger when they're way out here than when you get your nose strongly into it. One reason for that is that compounds like that are ones that we acclimate to really quickly. So some people acclimate to light struck aroma right away. So maybe they'll smell that in the first couple sniffs or the first couple drinks of, say, a Heineken or Corona or something that's part of the flavor profile is that it's skunky, right? But we acclimate to it really quickly. So they stop tasting that, right? So I think I have this theory that people that prefer those beers that have that light struck flavor, they acclimate to that flavor really quickly. And so that's the aroma of a freshly opened beer. So like, how can you argue with that, right? If that's what they enjoy. So yeah, smelling the beer far away. One of two things is going to happen. You're either going to, like with this beer, I'm getting some of the malty aromas all the way from over here. Some beers, you're not going to get much from far away. Also, if the beer is too cold, definitely you won't be getting anything from that far away. But it's always a good idea to do that. And take seriously what you do smell, because once you get your nose in there, you might not smell those things anymore because you've acclimated to them. So keep that in mind. Don't convince yourself that you didn't smell something that may have just kind of overwhelmed you and disappeared. Yeah. Oh, another, I put on the slide, so I just want to tell you guys what it is. There's another compound that we really quickly acclimate to. It's called sotalon. It's in fenugreek and also any artificial maple flavoring, as well as some other spices. So it smells like, log cabin maple syrup, like fake maple syrup. But we acclimate to it very quickly and quickly go like, oh, wait, no, there's not enough. So if you ever work with maple flavoring in any of your brews, keep that in mind. Like, you're going to add some and think it smells great, and you're going to go back and be like, oh, I can't smell it. I think I need to add more. Don't add more. It's there. Go for a walk around the neighborhood. Go do something else for a couple hours. Come back into the room. The room will probably smell strongly like maple. So watch out for stuff like that. Okay. Next is short, quick sniffs. So short, quick sniffs, just like if you've ever had any mammal pet, they don't go up to the other, dogs don't go up to another dog's butt and go, no, they take short, quick, bursting sniffs. And this is where the physiology kind of comes in. So we know that all of those receptors that are going to be helping us make that smell image, those are all in our nasal cavity. So our goal when we're smelling a beer isn't to get yoga belly deep oxygen deep into our lungs. It is to get as much of those aroma compounds into our nasal cavity as possible so that we can have a greater probability of having those flavor compounds interact with the receptors that are sensitive to them. So short, quick bunny sniffs, however you want to call it, really important. And if you kind of compare like just taking a sniff and taking multiple short, quick bursting sniffs of a beer right now, you will definitely see a difference in how much aroma you perceive. So definitely take those short, quick bursting sniffs. I put on the overall list here. After each assessment, you have to take some time and make sense of what your brain is telling you. That involves maybe putting the beer down, definitely taking it away, and just stopping and thinking about it for a second. Not writing, not trying to force it into something that you know. You want to see what comes first. I tell this to people when we're training on off flavors. Most people have an association with some of these common off flavors well before they experience them at a training. So it's really important to let your mind drift a little bit. Like if your grandma's house is coming up, or if a certain dish is coming up, or if a certain place is coming up, when you smell that off flavor, your brain's trying to tell you something about what you already know about that smell. And that association that you already have is much stronger than anything somebody can teach you in an hour at an off flavor training. So it's important to pay attention to what you're experiencing, what your associations are. Then you take that and you connect that. Okay, when I have this experience and I am in the kitchen and my mom's making creamed corn, that's when I smell that in beer, that's DMS. Then you learn, okay, DMS, it is commonly called creamed corn, but maybe your association is wildly different. But you can remember, when I have this experience, it's this compound, and this is how it's commonly talked about in the beer lexicon. So short, quick sniffs, and yeah. I often will do 2 or 3 rounds of short, quick sniffs, because this is, for me, like the height of it. This is where you're getting the most information about the aroma and flavor of the beer. But then I also like to do a long sniff. A long sniff is going to be a way to kind of more slowly draw the aromas through the nasal cavity, but also draw them deeper into the back part of your nasal cavity. Same area will be activated when we're tasting, but sometimes once you have the beer in your mouth, there's so much other chaotic stuff going on and so many other things to pay attention to. Some of the finer points can be lost. So when you take a long sniff, you're going to kind of start by like slowly taking that sniff. And as you reach the kind of top of it, like when you're like, okay, I'm kind of almost ready to be done sniffing, you're going to part your lips a bit. And that's going to cause that air to kind of move through your sinus cavities a bit and kind of out through your mouth, because you're just kind of letting some air out. So it kind of looks like this. And as you do that, there are certain flavor compounds. I am blanking on the one that is really important that you really get that way the best. But a lot of malt-based aromas, I find I get a little bit more strongly and with that method. And yeah, it kind of just gives you a different way of getting into like the depth and nuance of an aroma. Great. Any getting some really good comments. Okay. Sips. Sips are also really important. You're like, oh gosh, Nicole, can I just drink the beer now? Yes, you can, but there is a process there too. I have a preference, which is that I like to take kind of a small sip to clear my mouth of mouth flavor, right? Your mouth is not neutral. It's neutral to you, but it varies day to day, what you've been eating, et cetera, et cetera. And definitely in a flight of things, you're going to be influenced with what you had before, especially if there were strong mouthfeel components like astringency. So I like to take a first sip just to kind of like clear the palate, and get an initial impression of what the beer is like. And so I do try to notice, like if I take that first sip and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to drink my second sip, like I try to notice that. Yeah. But then I really work on assessing the full flavor on my second sip. So I'm going to go ahead and take a sip because I've been talking for a long time. Then when we go to our second sip, you want kind of like a medium-sized sip, not too big, but not too small, because you're going to want to hold that beer in your mouth for a much longer time than you normally would if you were just kind of drinking a beer out in your backyard. So you want to kind of chew it almost. You want to move the beer through your mouth. You're doing several things by doing that. You are warming the beer up. This is really important because as it warms up, more aroma compounds stop being happy to be in solution and come out. They volatilize and they get trapped in the tiny amount of air that's in your mouth, right? So you have this highly concentrated aromatic air that you're kind of causing in your mouth. You're also going to, by moving it, you're going to be increasing the chances for your taste buds to kind of be activated by the beer. You're also going to want to take time, especially at the beginning, to really assess things, all the mouthfeel components, so especially the carbonation, etc. So it's really important to take enough time to kind of go through your checklist of things that you want to think about. But yeah, so yeah, those are the main things there. Then what are you going to do with that highly concentrated air, right? Like that aromatic air is going to be really important for the rest of your assessment of the beer. So as you swallow your beer, you're going to basically immediately exhale through your nose. So you're going to basically take that air and kind of force it to kind of move up into your nasal cavity. Now, I'm making it sound hard. It's really not. It's really just remembering to exhale through your nose right after you swallow. And it does become second nature pretty quickly once you start thinking about doing that. But that's where you're going to really get the retronasal aroma, right? You're already getting some just having the beer in your mouth because that air is moving already. But having that exhale, and I kind of like open up everything eventually during the exhale, but you're going to get a really big impression there too. So my pushing, I went a little bit fast because, I'm self-conscious that I'm sitting here drinking a beer and not saying anything when I'm doing a presentation, but you should take your time and just see how that works for you. I think everybody's a little bit different. Once you become a little bit conscious of how the air moves around your own skull, you can adapt the technique in a way that works best for you. But it is really important to do that and maximize that. So that's the basics of the physical method of assessing the beer. But there's also a mental aspect to this too, because our brains, like I said before, that is where the flavor is actually processed. Like, yeah, receptors are great, but if you don't have a way of understanding the stimulus, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. So the stimulus that we get from taste and especially from aroma, unfortunately, don't go to the analytical part of our brains. They aren't very well connected to the language processing parts of our brains. And so it is difficult to make that bridge. So the way to do that is practicing, right? Which is why it's really important to talk about beer flavor, to write about it, handwriting it. Typing and handwriting are actually two different neural pathways. Talking about it, hearing about it, two other neural pathways. So by practicing connecting our aroma sensation to that analytical part of our brain that processes language, it's like learning any other skill. It's hard at first, but you go from being out there with with a machete in the jungle to a 6-lane highway with practice. That's the best thing that we've learned about our brains in the last decade or two, is that they are plastic, and with practice we can change our brain significantly and connect parts of our brains that maybe aren't naturally so. I definitely think that I had an advantage of being bilingual as a young child and having my grandpa with 30 fruit trees on his property, and we'd be sitting there in a different language talking about the flavor of 3 different pears. So I have to say that must be something that allowed me to be able to describe flavor. When we think about the mental aspect of tastings, we want to do some things that are probably common sense, and then some things that maybe we're not take a little bit more effort to think about. So being aware of your environment, that's why at sensory panels at breweries, it's always going to be in the same place, because trying to make the environment the same, removing variables. There's a lot of variables when it comes to sensory, so those that we can remove, the more we can remove, the better. So being aware of your environment, preparing yourself to focus. So, being aware of how distracted you are. Or if you're preoccupied with what you have to do later, it might be hard to be in the present moment with the beer that you're assessing. So it is kind of a mindfulness exercise. So any of those kind of mindfulness exercises that people are probably tired of hearing about by now, those are all really helpful ways of centering yourself to practice to be in the moment when you're assessing a beer and making that the only thing that you do. The whole physical process that we just went through of tasting also helps, because you're only going through that process when it's like hyper focused time on this beer in front of me, right? Reducing your expectations can be really important, especially goes out to home brewers, right? Or if you work at if you're a pub brewer or something like that. Cellar blindness is real, and your friends aren't going to tell you if the beer doesn't taste great. They're not. So reduce your expectations. Be really excited about some ingredient you're working with, or some hop you're trying, whatever it is, or how well a brew went. But just try to remove any expectations you have. Or if something went wrong, maybe you're like, oh, I left the boil too long, or whatever it is. Don't go looking for a scorched flavor just because you're worried that it might be there. Reduce your expectations, and just be prepared to just be in the moment with the beer and what you're getting out of it. Give basically kind of the same thing, but said in a different way. Let yourself experience the raw data without judging it at first. So don't be like, oh, this is shit beer. That's way too fast, right? You want to just say, okay, what are the flavors that I'm experiencing? Then later you can still feel free to decide, that's a shit beer, I don't like it. But you haven't jumped to that conclusion before you've even been able to assess the beer, because maybe even in that crappy beer there was something that you really were interested by, or really did enjoy, or that you found interesting for some other reason. So let yourself enjoy the beer or whatever you're assessing. You could do this with literally anything. And like I was talking about earlier, follow the thoughts that arise. If you've properly primed yourself to okay, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm not preoccupied with X, Y, or Z. I'm in this beer. And your mind drifts to something random, it's probably not random. It's probably something that you're experiencing in the aroma, flavor, or otherwise the situation that you're in that moment. So it's worth paying attention to those things and thinking about them and considering them. After you've allowed yourself that time, then you can convert them into the tangible thing, and start writing your description that would make sense to another person, because nobody's going to understand if you're like, oh, this beer tastes like the dream that I had everything was orange. Okay, great. But what does that mean? Um, Assessing each aspect of beer flavor is also really important. I haven't emphasized that much in the slides, but I do want to touch on this. Like using things like BJCP score sheets, or you can make your own score sheets or a checklist to make sure that you've gone through every flavor aspect of a beer. So as you do that, you want to train yourself to do that. So it's tough because you'll write a description and then you have to go back and go through your checklist and see, did I cover both the hop aroma and the bitterness level? Did I talk about the malt flavor? Did I talk about this? Did I describe fermentation characteristics? Did I hit everything in the mouthfeel bucket? But as you train yourself to do that, it does become second nature. So when I sat for the Master Cicerone exam, I wasn't sitting there going, did I talk about all aspects of the beer flavor when I did my assessment? I didn't have to think about that because I knew that I did, because it was my process. So it was one less thing to worry about and think about during that exam so that I could focus on the tasting flight in front of me. Then you can go back, reassess your descriptions, and then it's really important especially when you're learning, to connect to other people for lots of reasons. First, understanding how other people perceive things, kind of knowing where you are in terms of getting certain off flavors and not others, or whatever it is. There are some traps that we also have to be aware of. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're in a terrible mood, you might not notice that everything tastes bad. I know, like if I am mad at the way somebody did something at the brewery, the beers don't taste as good as usual to me, right? When I step into the tasting room. So there's a lot going on in our brains that can change the way we are perceiving flavor. One thing, though, that I think we as women unfortunately end up suffering for both for maybe some verifiable reasons. Maybe you are just beginning, but maybe just because of sexist reasons or because of other reasons. Like sometimes we suffer from a lack of confidence when we approach assessing beer flavor, especially in, say, like a competition environment. So like I said, sometimes that's totally just irrational. Like, here's where I am in my journey of being a beer taster, and you're just aware, like, there's a lot that I don't know, right? That lack of confidence could still get in your way, even if it is rational. It could also be kind of unfounded, like imposter syndrome, or if you got negative feedback from somebody about how you assess somebody, or if you just had a disagreement with somebody about the flavor of something, or if you've been actively discouraged, which I'm so sorry if you have. I've been fairly lucky to have been really encouraged by BJCP members from kind of early, when I got my early start. But I know that made me resilient when I did get discouraging comments. Another thing that I think we uniquely face that can cause a lack of confidence is the kind of high expectation of high performance. I don't know how many times I've had a man say to me, oh, well, women taste better because you can assess beer flavor better because you have more taste buds, or you have a better sense of smell. Which, in some regards, there are biological difference between the sexes, but not as much as there are between individuals, right? So it's always kind of this weird backhanded compliment. You're like, oh, well, of course you're a good taster because you have an advantage, right? That can be like really discouraging. And then also sometimes expectations feel so high. Like you're like, well, if I don't perform at that level, people are going to think I'm a total fraud. And it's kind of ridiculous because I don't think that we expect that out of male panelists or beer judges. So being aware of that is important. Sometimes we get confused when we taste things. We just have a misfire, like you just remember the wrong name. Like it comes right away, but you said DMS instead of diacetyl. Happens all the time. So that can happen. Conflation, we talked about that a lot before. And I have some stuff in the later slides that we might not get to about that. And then external influences as well. So there is a really cool sensory study that was done where the participants, there were two groups of participants, they were judging how soft toilet paper was by touching it. And in the control group, they had their assessment like normal. This was a trained panel. They had their assessment of the softness of the paper as normal. But in the test group, they played a very low but kind of grating sound in the background, like maybe not even enough that people noticed the sound. Like nobody said, "What's that sound? How do we make it go away?" It was just kind of there. Everyone in that test group rated the toilet paper much rougher than the control group. So things, harsh light, harsh colors, like something that is an external influence could be influencing the way you perceive something. So being aware is really important. We're getting kind of towards the end, and I put a lot of slides on here that I just thought were interesting, so you guys can feel free to look at them. But I do want to do two quick things. First, there were some giveaways that I'm supposed to do for, I'm not actually totally sure. I'm so sorry. It is a something from Cicerone. It's some sort of scholarship from the Cicerone program. So I have 4 winners here. There is. Oh, it's for Beer Savvy. Great. Yeah, Beer Savvy is a really fun program. There's 4 winners. So they are Stephanie Miracle, Heather Jackson, Hannah Colburn. Wow, I can't read my own handwriting. Sorry. And Jamie Corner. So come on down, guys. Congratulations. You win. I think you're going to get an email about that. So look out for that. We do have a couple minutes left. I want to see, there are questions I have not been looking at. Oh my gosh. Somebody asked me if I ever felt imposter syndrome. Yes, completely, 100%. I'm suffering through that right now, especially after losing my kind of dream job during COVID and like trying to like build my career back up again. It's been really tough. So yeah, I think that's something that is kind of something I actively struggle with. So yeah. How have I handled it? Like right now, I don't know, to be honest. So I think just doing something like this is great. Like it makes me feel confident. I love getting the energy from you guys. I think that's really, for me, what's been missing is I haven't felt comfortable doing events, and I'm not one of those people that built a big online thing during COVID. So for me, teaching people about beer gives me a lot of energy back, and that's kind of what fights the imposter syndrome for me. So I think you just have to find for yourself, what is the thing that you do that gives you that energy back, and make sure you do that instead of not doing it like I am. Super tasters versus non-super tasters. That question. So super tasters, it's also kind of something that gets thrown around, and it doesn't mean what most people think it means. Being a super taster is kind of like having a curse. Like super tasters can't drink orange juice without watering it down. Like when you're a super taster, you have a high concentration of taste buds, and everything's really, really intense. Super tasters tend to be very picky eaters and only like very sugary things. So you can look up more about that, but being a super taster is not it's not a good thing, the way people like to talk about that. There's lots of questions. How long does it take to fully assess a beer? I'd say like between somewhere in the, depending on what else is going on, if I have to write a full description or not, somewhere between like 3 or 4 minutes to 10 or 12 minutes if it's like more of a full description. So somewhere in there. But if you're really trying to assess a beer, I would plan on spending at least 5 minutes with it. But yeah. How can you guys train your palates? Off flavor kits are out there, classes. Basic taste training is something you can do at home with ingredients that are readily available at a grocery store. So things like citric acid and salt, and you can use caffeine pills for bitterness, and do cereal dilution, and kind of see where you start tasting it. That's something that I have fun doing sometimes. I have some other tips and things about becoming a better taster, becoming a better beer describer. I hit a lot of the things in those slides as we went, so check that out. I put at the end my Twitter, which I'm trying to get back into it again, and then my email. So if you have any questions that I didn't get to, feel free. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you guys have a great rest of your summit. And yeah, cheers.
All right. So you can keep going. So I know you can't hear me, Nicole, but you can keep going if you want. There's a few more questions if you want to keep going. Nicole's sound isn't working on her end, so she can't actually hear what I'm saying, so I'm trying to mime. Okay, you good? Okay. All right, bye everyone. Thank you so much.